Today, I've got 5 players in fantasy football that are going to bounce back in a huge way in 2024. Do not be afraid to draft these guys. And I think the last player is going to help you win your fantasy leagues. So do me a favor, hit that like button. I got a like goal of 100 likes, and subscribe to the channel if you like the content. The first player that you need to draft, he is going to bounce back. I'm convinced of this after some research. Christopher Godwin. Chris Godwin is a must-draft bounce-back candidate. I'm starting to think, after a lot more research, that 2023 was just an outlier for Chris Godwin. 2023 is the first time in the last 5 years that Godwin has averaged over 60 receiving yards and 7 targets per game, but finished outside the top 15 in fantasy points per game. From 2019 to 2022, every single year, he finished top 15 or better, and on average, on a points per game basis, he was a wide receiver 10 and averaged 17 PPR points per game. So that begs the question, like, what happened last year then? Did Chris Godwin fall off as a player? I don't see any evidence personally to suggest that he did. The second question you could ask is, well, does Baker Mayfield just not mess with Chris Godwin? Does he just not like Chris Godwin? And honestly, that's what I kind of chucked it up to before I actually dived into some research. I just said, you know what, Baker prefers Evans. That's as simple as it is. Well, in reality, that just really isn't true. Evans only had 6 more targets in the entire year last year than Chris Godwin. What looks abnormal between these two players, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin's stats? Okay, so Evans had slightly more targets. That's normal. Godwin had more receptions. Okay, that's also normal. So what's abnormal here? Well, if you look at the catch percentage for Chris Godwin, 63.8% is extremely low for what we have expected to see from Chris Godwin. That is by far his lowest catch percentage since 2019. From 2019 to 2022, you can see every year over 70% of the catch percentage. In fact, in those years, he's averaging 74.5% catch percentage, and then 63.8% in 2023. So what the hell happened? What changed? Well, for the first time in the last 5 years, the Bucs thought it would be a really cool idea to put this slot dominant player outside and play him as an outside wide receiver. He played 61.6% out wide and only 37% in the slot, which makes no sense whatsoever because Chris Godwin is a slot god. We know that. Godwin, slot god. You can see from 2019 to 2022, look at my guy playing in the slot primarily, you know, in those years where he played well. Now, here is the good news and why I think he bounces back and you should draft him. This coaching staff in Tampa Bay, Dave Canales is gone to Carolina. But this coaching staff has been very open in saying, we're going to play him back in the slot. It makes sense, right? Todd Bowles on Chris Godwin playing in the slot. This is according to Coach Speak Index. He's an inside guy by nature. He can play outside, but he can make a living inside doing a bunch of things for us. And we plan on letting him do a lot of things that he does best. So alluding continually throughout the offseason, this coaching staff is that Godwin will be back in the slot. And Todd Bowles has an 80% reliability rating when it comes to usage and workload, according to Coach Speak Index. So Chris Godwin, I know last year was bad, but he is a steal at ADP and he will bounce back. I promise you, playing in the slot. All right, the second player that I believe is going to bounce back in a huge way this year, you know the name, Aaron Jones. Do not sleep on Aaron Jones this year. Goes from Green Bay, stays in division with the Vikings, and he dealt with injuries last year, but when he was healthy, he was still extremely good at football and in fantasy football. In week 1, for example, he finished as the RB1. Over 26 points per game, but he pulled his hamstring. And we know with hamstrings, they really do not heal. It just takes a lot of time that you don't have in season. Then in the middle of the year, while recovering from a hamstring injury, he sprains his MCL. And really, the first stretch of games that we saw him healthy was week 15 into the playoffs. It was a 6-game stretch, week 15, then into the playoffs with the wild card and the divisional game, 6-game stretch. And that 6-game stretch to end 2023, look at this. Averaging over 120 total yards per game, over 106 rushing yards per game, averaging over 5.5 yards per attempt, and almost 18 points per game. Before 2023, Aaron Jones is an over 5 yards per carry career running back, and that's what he was last year. I like betting on guys that have a chip on their shoulder. Aaron Jones has got to have a chip on his shoulder, right? Like this intangible element that makes you believe a player has extra motivation to just go out and ball out that year, right? Same reason every single year that someone's on a contract year and they got to go and earn their money. You're like, actually, I'm going to bet on that guy. His livelihood's at stake right now. There's an intangible factor here with Aaron Jones. His previous team decided to cut him. decided to sign a new running back in Josh Jacobs. He stays in division, right, with the Minnesota Vikings. There's this intangible factor where I think he wants some get back. And look at the backfield that he's competing with, right? It's Aaron Jones, and then it's Ty Chandler, Kene Ngakwu, and Myles Gaskin. I mean, really, like, come on, he can beat out these guys. We know how good Aaron Jones is. If he stays healthy, he will be one of the steals at his ADP. All right, just a heads up. You do not need to wait until late August or September to play fantasy football. You can actually play fantasy football right now over on UnderdogFantasy.com. They got real leagues, real tournaments, real money on the line. If you haven't signed up yet, use the promo code LAND. That's going to get you a deposit matched 50% up to $250, meaning you could get $125 free dollars from us just by using the code LAND. And by the way, once you're done over there with the best ball leagues, you can look at their player props, the pick'ems for every single sport. All you got to do is pick higher or lower. You can 5x, 10x, 20x your money. And they also just brought in season-long projections that you can bet higher or lower on, which I love doing. Go check out the pinned comment if you want to sign up and have some fun. All right, the third player. Remember, my last player I think is going to help you win leagues. But the third player we're going to talk about today is Joey B. What is going on with the Joey B disrespect? Don't let, just like Aaron Jones, an injury-riddled 2023 stop you from taking a guy who has top 5 upside. Joey wasn't really healthy at any point in 2023. He had a calf strain in July at training camp. That carried over to the season. Then that was re-aggravated in a week 2 game. You can see the injury history here. And he has a wrist ligament tear in week 11 that took him out for the rest of the year. But you can see when Joe finally started getting healthy from the calf strain, that was weeks 5 to 10. Finally, he starts getting healthy. This is right before the wrist, tear. And in that span, he was averaging 26.8 points per game in a 6-point passing touchdown league. And by the way, before 2023, he had 2 fully healthy seasons in 2021 and 2022. And in those seasons combined, Joe Burrow is the only quarterback in both seasons to have over 5,000 passing yards, at least 39 touchdowns, over 90 PFF passing grade, and a adjusted completion percentage of over 77%. He is still one of the better quarterbacks in the entire NFL. And by the way, the Bengals should be very pass heavy in 2024, right? Their franchise running back in Joe Mixon. See you, brother. You're off to Houston. They now lost their franchise running back, but they've already been top 10 in passing attempts per game, even with the franchise running back. Now they don't have one. They've been averaging 37 passing attempts per game in the past 2 years. Do not be surprised now with no franchise running back. They drafted a wide receiver in Jermaine Burton. If this team is a top 5 passing attempts per game type of team, and by the way, T. Higgins, he's on a contract year. Remember how we talked about that with Aaron Jones? These guys have that extra motivation to go out there and ball out. Well, previously, T. Higgins might have rested an injury and kind of, I might rest this week and see if I'm available next week. No, T. Higgins is going to play through these little injuries and he's going to be available. That's going to upgrade the ceiling for a guy like Joe Burrow. All right, the fourth player is a tight end that I think we're all just throwing to the wayside, but he's a fantastic option. I think he bounces back. That's Dallas Goedert. If you miss out on some of the top tight end names early in the draft, round 3, 4, 5, I think it's worth targeting Dallas Goedert late in drafts. And, here's why. All right, if you look at, first off, his price, if you average out the ADP on ESPN, Underdog, and Sleeper, he's averaged out as the 114th pick in a 12-man league. 114th pick doesn't cost much. On average, round 10, the middle of round 10. So from a team construction perspective, you are getting your starting tight end as your 10th drafted player. That's going to let you build a powerhouse at running back, wide receiver, and quarterback. And we forget how good Dallas Goedert has been in his career. We are just 1 year removed. Remember, 2022, he was a top 5 tight end in points per game. And he's been a top 12 tight end in fantasy points per game in 5 straight years. Like, why are we sleeping on Dallas Goedert? He's a fantastic option. He's on one of the best offenses in the NFL. Last year, his offense was top 10 in points per game, total yards per game, and total touchdowns per game. And now we know that this defense is not what it used to be. In 2023, they allowed the 3rd most points per game, which means they had to throw the ball a lot. Why wouldn't that repeat in 2024? So I think Goddard's a fantastic bounce back candidate. And the last player who I think will win you your league if you draft him is Cooper Kupp. The ageist out there, the guys who are worried about injuries are not going to draft him. They're going to leave him on the board. They're going to call him soft, okay? Because he got injured playing one of the most physical games in the entire world. All right, they're going to call him soft. But if you look at when Stafford, Puka, and Kupp were all healthy last year, there was 11 games. And Kupp was still a problem in fantasy football. That 11 games was week 5 to 8 and weeks 11 to 17. And those games, you can see Cooper Kupp was still averaging a similar targets per game to Puka Nacua. You can see fantasy points per game. He was still averaging over 14. In that span, Kupp was averaging more points per game than Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, Garrett Wilson, Adam Thielen, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, and DeAndre Hopkins. And if you extrapolate those 11 healthy games, the big three's healthy, okay? Cooper Kupp would have finished with 9 receiving touchdowns and 87 receptions to Puka's 92. He is a cheaper buy-in in a really good Rams offense, right? If you take Puka Nacua, it's got to be at the end of round 1. If you take Cooper Kupp, he's in the middle of the 4th round, according to ADP. And regardless of which Rams wide receiver you guys draft, I'm telling you, get one of these guys on your team, because we have seen the Rams consistently ranked near the top of the league in total wide receiver PPR points in fantasy football under Sean McVay. This is according to Injury Shark. Let's look at this. Under Sean McVay, in 5 of the last 7 years, the Rams wide receivers have finished top 4 in fantasy points, in total fantasy points. Sean McVay knows how to get those wide receivers churning, right? We know Cooper Kupp back in the day, Brandon Cooks. Obviously, they also had Robert Bobby Trees, and obviously now Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. So you have to ask yourself, if he averaged over 14 points per game, Cooper Kupp that is, last year, dealing with nagging injuries the entire season, what could he do this year if he actually gets healthy and plays the entire season? I think he's a true league winner. I think he has a top 12 ceiling. And a lot of people might disagree with me, but that is where I stand. So let me know what you think. Hit the like button, show some love, subscribe if you like the content. Who do you think is the best bounce back candidate? I actually have like 15 more names in mind, so I'm happy to do another video if you guys like this. But thanks for watching. Appreciate you. We'll see you in the next video. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.